Okay, I'll try both. Good evening. My name is Mike Jasinski. I'm the Superfund Section Chief in EPA in Boston for New Hampshire and Rhode Island Superfund sites. That's roughly 30 sites in both of those two states. As Stacy indicated this evening, excuse me, I will present to you what EPA's proposal is to clean up the Centredale Restoration Superfund site. And this proposal is what EPA believes is the best plan to meet the 4 objectives you just saw in the previous slide that Stacy showed you. What I want to go back and show you one more time is the general action area, if you will, for our proposed cleanup. And it involves 5 separate little areas. As Stacy indicated earlier, what did I do? This is the original source area where the chemical manufacturing and drum recycling facility were located. Within that area, we have primarily 9 acres of contamination that is temporarily covered by interim caps that EPA and some of the potentially responsible parties put in place over the years. Within that area is groundwater. Groundwater is basically the water that exists under the surface that flows generally towards the Menascatucket River. And in that groundwater, there is contaminants, primarily now solvents, based from the chemical and drum recycling operation. No longer do we find high levels of dioxin and PCBs, primarily because in 2010, in this general area where the former manufacturing facility was, the potentially responsible party stepped up and spent $3 million to take about 2,300 tons of contaminated material out and shipped it off-site to a treatment and disposal facility. So we no longer have high levels of dioxin and PCBs in the groundwater there. Essentially, that was the source, but we still have solvents. The other action areas are the Allendale Ponds itself, Lyman Mill Pond, and the stretch of the river from Smith Street past the original source area. That's basically the contamination and the sediment that exists in the ponds and in the river channel. The 4th area is the floodplain areas that are shown here in pink in Allendale Pond. They're small in nature, so there's very little contamination in those floodplains right now, but they do exceed our cleanup goals. And lastly, we have Lyman Mill Pond and some floodplain areas in yellow, and also this major area that we call the Oxbow that has a lot of wetland and valuable habitat to it. So, from the 90,000-foot elevation, here's our proposal. It's essentially to dig up 185,000 cubic yards of contamination in those 5 areas: the source area, the ponds, Lyman Mill wetlands, the Oxbow, and the floodplain areas. Excuse me. Most of the highly contaminated material that's in that 185,000, the highest contamination, it's about 20,000 yards, will all be taken off-site and taken to a treatment and disposal facility that is permitted to handle that material. The remainder of the material, which will essentially be about 110,000 cubic yards, we propose to put that in an upland confined disposal facility in the area. That is basically a facility that will hold the material. It's out of the floodplain, on land, and it will be permanently and securely hold that contamination in place. We also will propose to cap the source areas again to put on more permanent caps on that 9 acres. We'll continue to do long-term monitoring of surface water, the sediment, groundwater, and the area where the permanent upland disposal facility will be, at a cost of $101 million. And as Stacy indicated, likely it would take up to 5 years to get to that point to start that work. I'm going to drill that down a little bit and give you a little bit more perspective on each area again. This is the source area. You have the Centredale Manor and Brook Village areas. You have a yellow area that identifies the contamination that has had some interim caps put on it by EPA and the potentially responsible parties. We will upgrade those caps, the parking areas, the grassed areas around the manor, about 9 acres or so. The area hatched here will be dug up. All 5,500 cubic yards we estimate will be taken off-site and disposed of properly in a permanent facility. We believe there is some potentially buried waste there still, highly toxic materials that will be taken out and not put in the Upland CDF confined disposal facility. Next, Ellendale Pond in the sediments, the major location for the contamination of dioxin in this area. 156,000 cubic yards, total volume, in-place volume, dewatered after processing before it goes into the facility for Upland's disposal, about 97,000 cubic yards. That will be all contained in the Upland disposal facility except for the most highly contaminated. We assume about 10% of that 97,000 yards would go off-site for treatment. Allendale floodplain soils, those are the purple areas I showed you in Allendale. They're small. It's about 2,400 cubic yards, and all that material will go in the Upland confined disposal facility as proposed by EPA. And the last area, the Lyman Mill Stream sediment, which is the area between the two ponds, the old raceway that goes under the Allendale Mill, or the condos now, and the stream from the rebuilt dam towards the Oxbow, in some of that floodplain area around there. Plus the Oxbow, we plan to target about 20,000 cubic yards of that material to be excavated. I call it targeted excavation because that Oxbow area is very, very sensitive. It's a very valuable habitat. We don't want to destroy that habitat. We're going to target the excavation in areas that have exposures for residents above the dioxin cleanup levels, usually of 1 part per billion. There's some exceedances of the state standards for residential recreational use that we want to target. We have those highly erosional areas, the streams between the two ponds. We want to dig that material out. That will be placed in the CDF, it's at the confined disposal facility, and most of that in the highly toxic material will be sent off-site. What we also would like to do in that area is place about a 3-inch soil cover to kind of enhance the recovery of the wetland area and not dig it up and impact it majorly. Hopefully that will recover that wetland quickly rather than taking out and digging it all up. One last note I wanted to make to all of you before I turn this over to Anna Krasko, the project manager, who will give you a little more detail about the Upland Confined Disposal Facility, is we are asking for public comment on several determinations. They are identified on page 8 of your proposed plan. Mostly I wanted to point out is because we are working in a wetland and a floodplain area, we have made several determinations regarding that we have to receive public comment on, and we're asking for you not only to comment on our proposal, but also to look at those determinations and make comments on those. With that, I'll turn it over to